Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to tonight's event. I was looking forward to Mobile World Congress this year, which happened as opposed to last year. I was meant to speak at the ministerial program last year and was deeply disappointed. It was my first opportunity to have a gold pass, and it didn't happen. So maybe next year. But I think this year's event was a really interesting mixture of different things that happened. I think we'd like to review tonight the highlights of the GSMA's Mobile World Congress 2021. And we all know how unusual the last couple of years have been. And I think Lara has just begun to describe what her situation was joining the GSMA just before the last conference was canceled. And what a difficult situation that must have been. I think the GSMA was quite brave to cancel. It was probably the first major event globally, major global event that was canceled at short notice, and quite rightly. And I think this is the first hybrid global event that has come back into our sphere. And I'm delighted that the GSMA has been brave enough to do both. So thank you very much on behalf of WiTT to the GSMA. We were due to review Mobile World Congress 2020, which obviously again was canceled or delayed. I think the interesting feedback, whether you were there in person or virtually, will still be coming through. I don't think it's going to be here all at once. So there has been quite a bit of feedback already, but it'll be interesting to see what the future will bring regarding large in-person and virtual or mixed events. So I'll be interested in hearing the panelists' views about whether we're going to ever go back to 110,000 people in Barcelona, or whether it's likely to be a mixed virtual and in-person event. So those views I think will be very important for everybody. You know, in contrast, 2019, there were about 107,000 in-person attendees, 2,400 exhibitors and 400 operator companies. 208 countries were represented. In contrast, and Lara may have better figures than I do, what I understand is that in 2021, there were approximately 20,000 people in person and 100,000 online views. And I've heard from a number of participants that the actual virtual, being able to look at and relook at the speakers was quite a useful activity. So there were 43 pavilions, 35 countries and territories represented internationally, and 33 delegates from the ministerial panel. So as presented at the event, the 3 C's that characterize the mobile industry, challenging the present, championing the future, and caring about the world. And I think we would all share those goals and ambitions. We need to carefully consider the 50% of the world population that don't have access to data, and also the illiteracy quotient for those who may have access but not be able to participate. So I think those are really important issues for us, all of us who participate in this industry. So key areas covered by the conference included 5G and the potential for 6G and what that would bring to us from a specific product perspective, IoT, artificial intelligence, other new technologies, and the role they'll play in automotive and smart cities, how telcos will define and differentiate themselves from cloud providers. And I think, as Mike has said on this, you know, cloudification was a major subject covered by the conference. And I had a really interesting conversation with a regulator who will remain nameless, who said they're looking at cloud and doing a bit horizon gazing. And considering, I think they're a bit late to the party because cloud was coined as a term in 1996. So I'm not quite sure why this is horizon gazing as opposed to figuring out what's happening right now. I think cybersecurity and lack of trust with vulnerable customers critically at risk is another area that we need to be carefully looking at. I'm looking forward to our panelists' views of the event and the future of mobile, and the future of Mobile World Congress next year, which I'm hoping actually to attend in person and maybe even might be fortunate enough to invite to speak. So we're really lucky to be joined this evening by Lara Dewar, who's the head of public relations and communications for the GSMA. It'd be great, Lara, if you could sort of give a bit of a introduction to how you joined the GSMA and what the last year has been like. And Wenbing, who is the cybersecurity officer and vice president of business development for Huawei. And especially not least, but ladies first, Mike Short, chief scientific advisor for the UK Department of International Trade. Mike was one of the founding members of the GSMA, and I'm not sure how many Mobile World Congresses he's attended, but I think we ought to ask him tonight. But I think his current retro perspectives will be interesting. So unless there are burning questions from attendees, I suggest we take them at the end, but you're welcome to add the questions to the chat, or if there is something quite specific to what we're talking about, please do raise your hand. So without further from me, over to the panel. Lara, can I start with you, please?
Thank you so much. And what a pleasure to be here. Very humbling to be amongst these other panelists. To your point, I joined the organization just a few weeks ahead of our decision to cancel MWC 2020. It was at a time when we were still calling this, at the time, very unknown virus, a coronavirus. We were not certain of its impact or the speed of its trajectory, but we did certainly realize that it was a threat and that bringing together international groups was not ideal in the situation, given the veracity. So I joined at that time. I come out of about a 25-year history in a series of other industries where I have developed some expertise in the area of crisis comms, but I come out of financial services and charity and the energy business, actually. So I was at the time very new to the telecom space. I have learned a lot in those 15 months, particularly in the way that this industry has had to respond to never before really experienced circumstances currently by current generations. And so from the moment that we decided to cancel those events, there was a very quick, of course, turn of events to move to virtual events, which meant a good deal of pivoting for an organization that really hadn't had to do much of that preceding that event. And then a decision taken by event as we rolled out the course of 2020 and then into 2021, because I don't know about the rest of the people on this call, but I was probably rather naive when we canceled MWC Barcelona. I really suspected that in a few short weeks after a brief lockdown, we'd get back to normal. And we did not. Do you want me, Stephanie, with that introduction to kind of go into our experience with this event, or to stop with that introduction and let the other panelists maybe introduce themselves and then?
No, I'd be really happy for you to carry on and okay. The event, you know, your experience canceling the last one and how you developed this one, because I think, you know, again, I think the GSMA has been very strategic in the way that it's put together a hybrid event. And I think hasn't happened very much.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we were the first, as you mentioned earlier, large conference of an international capacity, if you like, to cancel. So it's not very auspicious to be the first in that case, but it was necessary, we thought, to keep people safe. We were very glad in hindsight and believe definitely retrospectively that we kept people safe by not holding that event. It is amazing, though, in the face of doing the right thing, that you can take a great deal of criticism for doing it. The months preceding that were quite, as you can probably all appreciate, quite messy, because we just hadn't, again, faced anything like that. So there were so many ramifications, implications of that decision to be worked through. We are inordinately grateful for the support of our board, the support of our members, and the support of our exhibitors, who really have worked through and with us since that time. We did begin to digitize following that, like so many businesses did. So we moved to virtual platforms, and they were amazingly successful for us in that we attracted new audience to various dialogues around the world. But there is something in essence missing from a virtual only event. And we knew that there was building this pent up demand to get back together. Then in September of 2020, we made a disappointing decision again to postpone MWC 21. And then, like you said, we were able to recently hold that event. So the numbers that you quoted are correct. There was around 20,000 in-person events. The makeup of that crowd was slightly different compared to what we'd seen in past. Travel implications and travel restrictions put a significant harness, if you like, on the event, or anchor on the event. This event became the event of startups. The conversation, like you said, the emergent trends out of the show, very much 5G, very much the fact that digitization had been accelerated through the pandemic, very much an acknowledgement that a digital divide that we should all be concerned about fixing and addressing still very much exists, but also other emergent data like, the last time we met in 2019, there were 3 5G networks. There are now 165 5G networks. So it hasn't slowed down industry progress, certainly. And then we saw other interesting emergent trends. So macro themes were very much around climate and sustainability. That shouldn't surprise anybody at this table, around spectrum availability so that we continue to roll out those networks. And then really around what else can we digitize, enterprise level rollouts, et cetera. The makeup of the crowd, again, we are inordinately grateful for the exhibitors who were on site. We saw the launch and release of several products and devices. So this was the year of wearables. We were concerned going in that maybe there wouldn't be momentum around that sort of thing, but we definitely saw that, and probably this notion of 5G digitization and what that means for a consumer is helping to propel some of that innovation. I think that we saw hundreds of thousands, to your point, join us online, and we had demand for our content out of that event in a way that we hadn't seen before. So the event content itself played over major networks, C114 in China. It played out over BBC, CNN, CNBC, and Bloomberg has requests out for the content. So we saw lots of that. I would say an emergent trend that doesn't get mentioned in any of our analytics, though, is really the fact that most people who attended the event would tell you, gosh, it was just good to be back together with people again. We had very strict, as you know, health and safety measures in place, a very significant amount of rigor around testing, social distancing, mask wearing, digital registration, digital badges, touchless environment. And it is remarkable that I know actually all of those things. I know those plans with a fine tooth comb, and it is really hard as a human being to not touch people and hug them when you see them and when you meet them. So we spent the first day, most of us commenting on the fact that it was just emotional to be together with people of that magnitude again. And so there was an appreciation that at this event, whilst 20,000 people instead of 100,000 people, that its energy was palpable. And so when you talk about the future of events and are they necessary, there's probably smarter people in the room to tell us if they're necessary. What I will tell you is that there's a desire for human beings to be together. And there's something different that happens when we can do that. We were very proud that we could take what we learned out of those virtual environments, though, and apply them to this event. So whilst we had always in years past played out or made digitally available certain kinds of content, this really was an attempt to create networking environments, meeting rooms, and really create intimacy virtually in a way that we'd only ever done physically before. I would say we've got a long way to go in that, but it was a valiant effort. It was a start. I don't see the need for virtual elements going away anytime soon. I don't think the pandemic's going away anytime soon. And so I think we're going to continue to see from organizations like ours a desire to build those, get more creative in how we roll them out, continue to promote them, and continue to bring those two things together in the best ways that we know how, in the best ways that we can use technology to do that. And so we are calling as an organization the event a huge success. Again, couldn't have done it without our exhibitors and then key partners to roll it out. So we've held not only an event with 20,000 people, we've held a safe event with 20,000 people. And that's as a result of really strategic partnering with the city of Barcelona, Spain as a country, many people in between, airport authorities, city authorities, health and safety authorities, but also a very significant medical partner, Quiron Prevention, who helped us conduct all of the testing and just did an absolutely stellar job in making in making sure people felt safe being together. And then, of course, each attendee who just adhered to it. There was a community responsibility to keep one another safe that was really, again, palpable in the event itself. People respecting social distancing or doing their utmost to do that. People respecting the need to wear a mask, you know, the digital badges, the submitting to tests. I don't think we could have asked for a better result than the one we got. So we're absolutely delighted to be this side of it and are looking forward to our next event, which is MWC LA in October. And then, of course, being back in Barcelona in February. And Stephanie, I'm very happy to put in a good word for you to be a speaker at that event. To consider that done.
Well, that's fantastic. And thank you very much for your contribution, because I don't think we could quite have understood the mixture of what happened on the ground and virtually without that very clear introduction of what the GSMA did to make it happen all around.
You know, in a normal year, we probably have, if you measured it in what I know best, which are media mentions, we maybe have around 4,500 media mentions of the event. This year, we had almost 24,000 media mentions of the event. So the shift this year really was, we went from being a platform for other people, like our exhibitors, to share their news, to being the news. That we were bringing people together, that the event was moving forward in this hybrid nature, that people were coming and attending and exhibiting really became the news item. And I saw for the first time in my 25-year career, even the press were with us. There was this kind of atmosphere of goodwill, if you like, that really people just wanted to see the event come together and come together safely. We needed this in this moment as kind of a signal that things could get back to, you know, to overuse a term, to a new normal.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
Sure.
I'll unless people have burning questions, are there burning questions in the audience? I'm sure there'll be lots of burning questions afterwards. I have a few. I'll turn over to Wenbing.
But thank you very much for having me here, and also invite Huawei to join the organization, and we're very happy to participate. And so, and also thanks for Lara to share your experience and your view from GSMA's perspective about Mobile World Congress. Mobile World Congress for Huawei is a sort of a flagship event for many, many years, and we always have the very, very big hall, or half of the hall, in Fira and in previous years. And unfortunately, last year it was cancelled, and this year we returned. We returned to Barcelona. We had our hall, and we also had many customers visiting. So this is a great opportunity for us to review what we've seen, and we have summarized some key areas about Huawei, from Huawei's perspective, what the Mobile World Congress is, let's say, buzzwords, and what are the key messages here. So we have seen that there are a lot of voice right now to call the industry to move from the politics to the proper, the real ICT industry's cooperation. So cooperation is a common voice that we should upholding digital sovereignty and preventing the world from falling into division. I think from Huawei's perspective, and this is more so because we are under unprecedented pressure from some other countries, and this is something that Huawei really would like to call for the industry to work together. And we're very happy to see that in many of the keynote speeches, such as the one that was delivered by Margaret from the European Commission, and also the Orange and Facebook, etc. And they are all calling for the industry to work together, cooperate to build a safe digital environment to prevent the world from moving to a silicon curtain. And the Professor Harari, who wrote the book of A Brief History of Humankind, who works in Israel, and he talked about from the Iron Curtain to Silicon Curtain, and we have to prevent this new kind of division of the world. And European Commission and Europe can play a central role to prevent this. And Margaret said the digital concept should be understood as a basic concept based on the European values. And the EU is not only lead the way internally, we need to work with 8 countries to build a safe global digital environment. And the EU must make it happen with all of us, international level, public and private sectors. So it is impossible to close the door for digital and cybersecurity, and we can't fight alone, and we must build trust together. And that's what Orange was saying. So we do see that cooperation is one of the major voice in terms of the macro environment development in this area. And in terms of regulation, we see that telcos, as usual, and lots of telco companies and CEOs, such as the Telefónica's group CEO or Deutsche Telekom's CEO, they call for a more friendly regulation, support investment in the innovation. And particularly, I think Deutsche Telekom CEO said that they are hoping that the regulation could enable their investment for future and to help the environment, help to innovation, help to innovate in an easier way. And they pointed out 2 major things. One is the so-called unfair competition, which they think that the traffic, especially the video traffic, increases rapidly, but most of the traffic is contributed by the OTTs. So the regulators need to create a fair environment. Why is it that 80% of the traffic is generated by OTT while they don't pay a dime for the infrastructure, and then they get all the data value of the consumers? That's a sort of a quite strong cry for a change of the regulations. And also they call for a rethink of spectrum auctions. And because the spectrum auctions are key cost driver, and competition required that free riding infrastructure should not be enabled. And so this is sort of a reservation of the spectrum and regulated access to not build the networks. So the regulators should support 5G development by supporting investment in infrastructure and the infrastructure-based competition. So that's on the regulation side, and we can see that although the sort of cry is not like unheard of, and we know that every year in Mobile World Congress, the CEOs and of big telecom companies ask for a more friendly regulation, but the support on the spectrum side is something that I think could could be something that could be done straight away. And the green is another area that sort of comes very strong in this year's Mobile World Congress. And the green focus is changing from focusing on the energy consumption to energy efficiency. And the industry is seeking new standards and technologies to improve ICT green contributions. And Huawei, on the day 0, and that's the day before the Mobile World Congress started, we have held a green forum and to look into the green 5G, etc. And so the industry-wide climate actions are ongoing, and we see that lots of companies have set up their carbon neutral target, and how to build a sustainable 5G networks, and how to make sure that there is an always-on connectivity, but its impact on the environment is sustainable, and we're not damaging or detrimental to the carbon neutral target. And that is a very big challenge in front of the whole industry. And it's quite interesting to see that the Orange Telecom, they have claimed that 5G will be 10 times energy efficient than 4G in 2025. And they even gave an estimation that by 2030, 5G will be 20 times energy efficient than the 4G. So what they have shared is that there are 3 ways to optimize the 5G energy consumption, adapt to the site configuration to real customer needs, select the right power amplifiers, and use green features from day one, activate sleep mode, etc. And Open RAN, which is a very hot topic right now and the whole industry is working on, still has some way to capture the pace in the energy efficiency side. But there are lots of talks about how to improve the new innovative technologies to make our industry greener, let's say. And business transformation is also another big areas that the operators have brought forward, and they think about thinking about telco's transformation is from strategy design to operation management. And we see that China Mobile and Deutsche Telekom have provided and share their business mind. And the China Mobile has given a very detailed roadmap and experience on how they accelerate their digital intelligent transformation to seek the 5 areas success. And I think all 3 operators in China has been focusing on rollout 5G in a massively rapid way. And we heard numbers like 1 million 5G base stations will be rolled out in the next few years. And that is just completely mind-blowing if we compare with the other part of the world. So we'll have to see whether the business can gain from that rapid rollout. And I remember Mike previous few days and shared some of his views that in Europe has chosen a different strategy and chosen different pace. And maybe there's nothing right or wrong, and it's just the right strategy that's suitable for the region. But we are very eager to see how that pans out, and in terms of the business return at the end of the year. So in the transformation area, we also see Deutsche Telekom share their vision 2030. They've focused on 5 transformations on customer experience, software-driven enterprise solution, and using orchestrator to manage the network, to put the network of networks together, and also goes to provide a telco as a platform, and Vodafone has also talked about network as a service, IT as a service in their strategy. So these are very, very important transformation trends that we see the whole industry is coming along, led by the big telcos in the world. Stephanie, please remind me if I'm taking up too much time. Well, I don't remember when I started.
No, I think that's very interesting. So I think you've got a bit more time if you'd like, if you have more, but you've already given us quite a lot. So is there more that you'd like to add?
And I think I'd like to mention two things. One is about the 5G business success, which has been focusing on the 5G 2B area. And although operators are still fighting their corners for the 5G, the business to consumer market, but the business to business area and that's going to be enabled as by 5G as a new blue ocean is everybody putting a lot of hope on. And so that is one of the area, one of the things we've seen. The other thing I would like to point out is the so-called cloud and openness. I think probably Mike will talk about it as well. We see that there is a mixture when the industry looking at the so-called cloudification and openness. And so cloudification has become a consensus. Also, there are different comments floating in the air. AWS is coming in as a big way. They have a big virtual village, and they have the ambition to build a ubiquitous cloud programming model on carriers network. And they offer the multiple MEC, multiple edge computing platform. And also they have the view that the telco will ditch their telco cloud and completely move to a public cloud. Oh, sorry, it's not them, but it's a telco DR. They think the telco cloud will eventually be replaced. And so that is something that we as a traditional, incumbent in industry is quite interested to see how this is going to develop. On the other hand, the telcos, and they are still thinking of how to ensure the long-term security if they put everything into public cloud, and how that is going to be, how the security will be ensured. And that's on the cloud side. And openness side, of course, the Open RAN is the hot topic, a stormy propaganda from outside Europe, like a lot of the US and Asia companies are looking into provide, their position in the telco in the telco market by providing Open RAN solution. Marvell, Rakuten, Vodafone also has been leading a lot of activities in that area. So these are something that is very new, is at the forefront of where the industry goes. So like or not, and we'll probably have to embrace them and see how we're gonna what is gonna be like in next year this time in Mobile World Congress. I think I would just stop here.
I think one of the things you and I spoke about a little while ago is how much you enjoyed participating virtually. And I think it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about that, and then I'll hand over to Mike.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me again to take part in this sort of annual event, what happened at Mobile World Congress 2021. I thought I'd start with a few points of evidence, as is typical of a scientist and an engineer, because I think we've seen some amazing pieces of evidence associated with World Congress in the last 4 weeks. So just a couple of things. 30 years in July since the first GSM public call was made, 30 years ago in July 1991. Announcement in June by Strategy Analytics and indeed others that we'd exceeded 50% smartphone penetration globally for the first time ever. Some great statistics from the GSM Association in terms of how we were progressing with numbers of customers globally. So their annual figures were really helpful in the mobile economy report. We need to view an event alongside some of these publications, because it's the publications that really help us understand where we're at as a kind of temperature check. So GSMA talked about 8 billion customers, potentially rising to 8.8 billion customers by the end of 2025, of which around 18% or 1.8 billion will be 5G. Now that really is a kind of a navigation map really for growth. And the growth is driven not just by numbers of customers anymore, it's increasingly being driven by data growth, which is the key reason why many are investing in 5G. The data growth needs to be served, and the added capacity and capability and content or services of 5G are really helping to manage that. Also, some great data from GSMA around mobile money. Their State of the Industry report reported 1.2 billion mobile money accounts. This is the ability to transfer money from A to B, from one phone to another, particularly relevant in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly relevant in Southern Asia. But the growth in that area has been truly stunning. and the value of the transactions that are in that area are phenomenal. So if you've not seen it, worth a look. Clearly, some evidence was provided about the GSMA's commitment over the last 5 years now to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and their latest progress report. And if you imagine that there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the fact that mobile can contribute to all 17 of them is really remarkable. But I think GSMA has shown real leadership consistently for 5 years in terms of championing mobile as a force for good. And I think that's really unified the industry together, despite some difficulties that were referred to by Wenbing. So to me, the force for good arguments came across really well. I also note from the figures recently released from China that China went over 495 million 5G customers at the end of June this year. That was only announced yesterday, I believe. So it means today we've got the first country with over 500 million customers using 5G type subscriptions. And that's quite remarkable for something which is really only emerging from the first full year of 5G rollout. And it's true that China started earlier, maybe with a more coherent strategy than many countries, but the rates of growth and numbers are really quite phenomenal now. And Ericsson's recent mobility report in June talked about a much faster rollout of 5G compared to 4G a few years ago. So the early years of 5G are showing rapid growth. So I think what we had, in addition to the evidence from Mobile World Congress, was a lot of knowledge sharing. I, for one, have been going to Mobile World Congress, believe it, for 30 years. And my first one was in 1990. And I had, when the cancellation occurred last year and the delay this year, I had withdrawal symptoms. You know, I felt pangs of guilt that I wasn't in Barcelona at the right time. I felt the people who I couldn't meet, I was missing. So to me, the online or hybrid approach fulfilled some of my needs in terms of information and contact, but I really missed the networking, which frankly online you just cannot do as much as you can in a physical event. So I hope to be back on a plane next February, ready for next Mobile World Congress. And maybe I'll make it the round 30 for real, as opposed to having missed one and a bit. I think it was great that GSMA managed to broadcast so much of the content. I really enjoyed some of the keynotes in particular. I thought Matt Skranrid, as Director General, really set the tone with his reference to challenging, championing, and caring, because actually those 3 C's are memorable, but it's what we do. And when you have withdrawal symptoms, it's because you can't do what we do. Basically, unless you have the networking, you can't get on with the work in hand. I'd also add that I think the absence of certain players left a lot more room for other players. So the reference made earlier by Lara to the startups, that was very obvious. It was no longer a 2-venue arrangement, old FIRA, new FIRA. It was a single venue arrangement, but a lot of the startups filled the gap. Unfortunately, online, that was less accessible. We couldn't really get the buzz online of that startup approach, but reports I've had from other people who were there said it was fantastic. So I'm sure we're going to keep that startup flavor for future events, but we need to, because innovation is everywhere. Some of the startups need both the investment and the customer contact, but equally that innovation needs to flow internationally. So long may 4 years from now remain integral to the main event. I'd also add that some of the other internet players or cloud players filled some gaps as well. I found it quite stunning to see some of the work by Telco DR from a public cloud point of view, and how they took up so much space to promote the cloudification of networks. Clearly, this is challenging to incumbent vendors and indeed incumbent operators, because it's a world of change. And even if cloud was first talked about in the 1990s, it's really only grown in the last few years to be relevant in the telecom space. And just to remind you that the telcos are not old-fashioned when it comes to adopting cloud. Clearly, some have already adopted cloud for content delivery networks, also for provisioning of certain services, for things like billing optimization and customer care. They're beginning to introduce cloud into the core and radio access or MEC type network elements, and they're being used for anti-fraud solutions. But it's a huge growth area, but it will be disruptive. And I'm sure a lot more people felt after not just Telco DR, but others talking about cloud, that was one of the major subjects from Mobile World Congress this year. Personally, I think it overtook 5G itself, and it overtook Open RAN as a main story. I think cloud was ahead of those two subjects, even though there was very high interest in 5G, lessons learned, and Open RAN. How can you do it? I was a little surprised that 6G emerged a bit more fully this year. It certainly wasn't so visible last Mobile World Congress I went to, but the roadmap from 5G to 6G is being talked about, whether it's for 2030 or 2028. You know, there's a lot of research to do, and frankly, what spectrum is going to be used, and will it play and interoperate with 5G, or will we start to bifurcate the world into the haves and have-nots? There are lots of issues in terms of 6G development from a devices point of view and from a networks point of view that just need to be worked through, but pleased it was included. I was really pleased that satellite had a high profile slot for the first time. Elon Musk being interviewed the day after his 50th birthday was really quite stunning. And some of the bigger organizers would have given their hen's teeth to have had an Elon Musk type interview, the likes of which Justin Springham bravely performed. Not easy to present to somebody when you've not had the chance to fully rehearse or know whether the technology from California to Barcelona will work. And also with somebody like Elon Musk, not really knowing what he will talk about because he has so many interests, from the origins of PayPal through some areas to do with starships and satellites through to areas such as Tesla. But Justin Springham managed to make it all relevant for the audience. And I think Elon Musk came across as offering a satellite type service as a complement and as a partnership option to cellular, not as a competitor to cellular. And I think that's what people wanted to hear. So he's real, but you know, he has to test the satellites he's launching every month or so, and has to make sure it works in a real sense. He knows he's got challenges with the price of handsets that will reach the satellites, but he said so. He also knows that it's more suitable for the rural areas, not for cities. So he knows he has some technical challenges ahead, but he was a man who was really confident in what he was saying and could see great prospects of partnership between cellular and satellite. Going back to some of the other areas, Internet of Things has been touched on briefly. Certainly the major growth area in connected machines or cars or robots is expected to be huge. And I would say that was in my top 5 subjects as well. There was a lot more interest in how do you deliver both smart cities and connected cars, a lot more interest in making sure they were secure and also making sure they could be managed. There was also an awful lot of interest in terms of dealing with the pandemic, not just the great way that Mobile World Congress was run as a hybrid event, but also what does it mean for the world of work, whether you're working from home or away from base? What does it mean for the world of health, whether it's digital health and the doctor will see you now down a Zoom call, or maybe some areas such as learning and online education. We can see lots of mobile operators have stepped up around the world to really connect schools that were disconnected, perhaps from libraries as we know them in the West, maybe disconnected from the internet. And frankly, children, health, education, it all needs to be connected to offer better services for the 21st century. So I think my overall headline leaving this Mobile World Congress 2021 is there's an awful lot still to do. It's a growth industry still, maybe not as fast as it once was. It's also an industry which is affecting so many parts of society. It's maybe technical to many, but in practice, the social impact of what can be done is huge. And we really must do more work on inclusion, whether it's accessibility and the disabled, whether it's the male-female gender balance, whether it's the income disparity and how to rectify that with better connectivity. There's so much more to be done in that area of inclusion. So to me, that caring point goes to me as equal weight to championing and challenging the way we look at communications. A lot more to do. Hope I haven't gone on too long. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I also would like to express my disappointment that we didn't do this event last year, because Mike was going to receive an award, one of the Glomo Awards, which he started how many years ago?
In 1995.
Well, I think it was a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I think very well deserved. So I just thought that ought to have a mention in this year's WiTT event. And we're very grateful that you've been a regular participant since the very beginning of our annual event, Reviewing Mobile World Congress. So thank you very much for your support, continued support. I'm going to now, if the speakers want to come off mute and turn their cameras on, we'll take questions from the audience. I don't know if you would like to raise your hands or however you'd like to participate or ask questions, or you can put the questions in the chat if you'd prefer. We've had one congratulations from Helen to you, Mike, saying, you know, I think everybody would, round of applause, well deserved for a lifetime of fantastic participation in an ever-changing and very interesting industry. So can I ask the participants for questions? Any questions of Helen?
I have a question for Lara. So Lara mentioned, Lara, you mentioned that actually you got quite, I guess, a lot of resistance to the actions that you took and had to take around last year's event, and maybe, you know, this year, but I don't know about this year. Is there anything that you would have done differently? I guess, what did you learn?
I'm trying to get my camera to come back on, so I apologize.
That's okay, we can hear you.
Thank you for the question. I think what I mean, I probably already knew this, but I think this became a very poignant example of you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yeah.
So we took criticism for canceling, and then some of the very same people who criticized us for canceling criticized us for moving forward this spring.
Oh.
And I think the lesson in that is also to be courageous in leadership and to use, to Mike's earlier point, to use data to inform your decisions. At some point, we had to take a decision. There were a lot of people who were partnered with us. There was a lot of pent-up demand. And what we needed to do, we felt as leaders in this space, was to begin to create some momentum along a path back to quote unquote normalcy. And once we felt that we'd satisfied ourselves that we could do that safely, it then became an exercise in how do we make others have, or share rather, our confidence in doing this safely. And how do we recognize, by the way, that it's not going to be the same event? So we're going to be potentially criticized for having it. We're going to be potentially criticized that it's not a replicate of 2019. People will forget the nuance in the middle that we are living in a pandemic, but isn't moving forward incredibly important. And if people have given you a leadership position and shared that platform with you, don't you have ultimately a responsibility to do something with it? And I saw the leadership team at the GSMA live up to those values. I think that we had to continue to look at data, and I've never seen such a fast moving, but also such a shifting landscape where every day there were new data elements to look at. And it was kind of a moment where we had to not blink around a strategy, but be prepared to pivot if the data said that that's what we needed to do in order to keep people safe. And so I think critics be damned. You have to make a plan and then stick to your plan.
Yeah, brilliant. It sounds like you're very happy with what you did, which is just awesome. So thank you, Lara.
Thank you.
That answer your question, Helen?
Yeah, it
That's
does.
a very good question and a very good answer.
Yeah, brilliant answer.
Well deserved. I have a question for Lara. What are the specific challenges of organizing a hybrid event?
I think Mike touched on this a little bit in his overview. I mean, there are certain elements that you have to appreciate and probably just recognize that are very difficult to replicate. It's very difficult to network or create a networking kind of vibe, if you like, in in a hybrid element. I think what you have to be is really honest with participants about what you can deliver. And I think you have to be prepared to continue to experiment. Like I said earlier, I don't think the need for this is going to go away anytime soon. So it behooves those people who are in a leadership position to continue to experiment and invite people to the table in the hopes that they'll take us up on that offer and give us feedback on what we could be doing better. I think there's such a huge appetite out there for content that we also have to be open to sharing it across broader channels than we ever have before, recognizing that ours is not the only channel or the only platform, but rather partner with other people who can help us share those messages to propagate important dialogues. And to Mike's point, innovation. The important part of having, by the way, startups in the center of the floor this year was not just the energy that they created on the show floor, but because there's an exchange when innovation happens. It's not a one-way street. There's an exchange and an invitation. And so if we can somehow figure out how to replicate that energy and that invitation in the virtual environment, it means we bring new people to the table that have never been able to be at the table before. We can offer things in a more inclusive environment than we ever have before. And so I think it's incredibly important, but it's what I would call immature at the moment, and requires maturing to get to a place where, you know, I've attended lots of things. I'm sure you all have. I'm exhausted by the number of virtual kind of invitations I get. And I'm a little bit exhausted 15 months in of attending things and being on video and having to have my kids walk on tiptoe in the background. And so, you know, I think there's some elements of all of us adjusting to how we'll incorporate this in our lives going forward. I hope that answers the question, or the spirit of the question.
I think it certainly did. And I had an interesting conversation with Wenbing before this event. And she was saying how much she actually enjoyed attending virtually. So maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can you explain what it
Yeah.
was that you found helpful?
To be honest, I prefer virtual meeting if I want to understand what the speakers are saying, because when you go to the actual meeting, you have got a whole room and then so many things distracted that you've been put out, and people, they're so far away on the screen, on the stage, and some stuff you can't really see. Whilst the virtual way, you can review it and you can see it again. So I didn't go to Barcelona this time, and I just watched the video recordings on my sofa with my dog next to me. I thoroughly enjoyed the virtual Mobile World Congress. Yeah, I do miss, you know, the physical interaction and stuff, but you know, you need to balance that. Maybe for 1 year you can watch it from home, and the next year you go there physically. You have both of the good things.
Mix it up. I think that was an interesting perspective that you had, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I thought Lara would enjoy hearing that particular angle. Annette?
Yes, I've got a question around the whole cloudification issue, the fact that is happening so strongly across all of the industries. And there was something in the papers this morning about the Bank of England being very concerned, particularly about the fact that there are really only 3 significant providers of public cloud, and huge amounts of everything is going on to public cloud. The Bank of England's issue is banking, the amount of banking data that's going on to public cloud, that the banks don't know where the data is being held, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the issues of security and geography. And I was just wondering, given that cloudification is something that was discussed at Mobile World Congress, whether that issue of 3 major providers, you know, basically AWS, Microsoft, Azure, and Google, dominating the whole thing, and the issues of lack of competition here, whether that was addressed, whether that was discussed as an issue, and indeed what your views about it are.
Oh, it's a great question, but I think one of the reasons why I think both operators and major sectors are nervous about cloud is the very risk of dominance And even maybe the cloud providers might compete in some ways with either operators or the banks and other verticals themselves. So I think there is a slowness to adopt, because whilst there might be benefits of cost reduction and new ways of doing things, people are still nervous about that data privacy and data protection and data sharing type approach. However, the reality is that the amount of data being processed in networks is so big now that we need an IT first approach. And that starts with databases, not just cloud. How are you going to handle bigger and bigger databases? How are you going to handle bigger and richer functionality? So the reality is that the choices about dominance versus the choices about how you can do it cost effectively are really tensions that exist. I think issues of security also come into this as well. So who do you trust the most? And it's also true that the big three happen to have independent systems integrators, independent partners that may add value in different ways. So some people are mitigating the risk of dominant heartland cloud providers because they're using major systems integrators who know how to make the most of the cloud in a value-added sense. So it's been discussed. I think it will continue to be discussed. And I think it will probably be one of the major subjects for next year's Mobile World Congress as it progresses. People will want to see case studies which prove that it works at scale consistently and well and offers the quality that is expected in a public grade, carrier grade network.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Mike. But what about private networks? I mean, we're seeing private 5G, but those are generally for single site or much more restricted type of opportunities. Are there opportunities for the mobile providers themselves to provide full cloud?
Some mobile operators already offer systems integration and private cloud or virtualized services, if you like. I think it's often not well understood how many private networks are in use in the UK, for example.
I agree.
And we've actually had private networks on my old O2 network since 1987.
Right.
So the cloud element is a little bit newer, of course, but we have many private networks already in place where the corporate customer may have asked for optimized radio coverage, maybe enhanced security, maybe a private numbering dialing plan, maybe some optimized cost center billing. All of those sort of things have been around for over 20 years. Now, that's not the case in many countries in Europe today because they liberalized later than the UK did. And they didn't have as much competition as the UK had in the 1980s. So some of that catch up is still going on. So when you add the cloud element to it, you're bringing in other elements into that private network space. And I'm sure we're going to see different combinations. I should also just add, and then I'll finish. I think we also heard a lot during World Congress about the importance of shared networks and neutral host networks, which I see as quite different. And in a way, clouds are really neutral data centers that can be used by more than one. So there is an extension of that sort of shared network ethos or neutral host type approach with cloud itself. And I think it needs to fit that context.
Wenbing?
Interesting.
Yeah, I just want to add one point, sorry, because this is very relevant to what I do every day. I think on the cloud side, there is a nervousness in the security community. And we heard recently, and in fact, it has been going on for a while, but because of the US Cloud Act, which allows the US government to order their companies to handle the data, regardless this data are in US or not. Basically, if even the data is in a data center in Europe, and they can still order their own company to handle this data. So that nervousness has become stronger, and when the service providers and when the vendors are looking at it. Hence, there is quite a lot of discussion on the so-called digital sovereignty. And do we have sort of a cloud service providers in Europe And yes, in China, we have Alibaba and a number of them, but in Europe, which cloud service provider that's big enough that can carry on lots of work? And that's one thing. The other thing is, I think the regulators and the government should really look into this data governance area, how we can make sure that the consumer's data and sensitive data can be and guaranteed that will not be, exploited in one or another. As you said, there are only three cloud service providers. Now, all my emails, sensitive email, personal emails are in these three cloud service providers network. So I think I'm transparent to them. I believe millions consumers are exactly like I am. So there will be some concerns about it when the public starts to be aware of that sort of implication.
Good point.
I think that's right. One thing I'd like to just add in, you've got AWS and Google are featuring very much in the cloud, and we're talking about that, but have the telcos completely missed out?
One more thing is that actually telco operators, and they do offer their own cloud. For example, Deutsche Telekom have an open telecom cloud. Orange have their cloud. Vodafone has its own cloud. So these telcos, I believe, probably as well. The telcos, major telcos, have their own cloud, and a lot of their infrastructure are moving into the sort of the cloud-based network architecture. So cloud itself, as a technology, is becoming a fundamental building blocks for the network architecture for the whole telecom network. But what is more sensitive is the data and the stuff running over this infrastructure. And if we move everything into the public cloud, yes, you are literally, you only have three people, three companies that supporting your own telecom infrastructure. That is some strategy that the telco have to decide.
Thank you. They just seems, I've watched a lot of telcos sell a lot of their data and cloud assets. So I'm glad, it's a little bit there, but they're not really there in the same way some of the big players have moved into the market, I don't think. Julia?
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to, first of all, thank you all the panelists for very interesting presentations. Thank you very much. So my question is about 5G applications. I think a year or 2 years ago, there was a sentiment, at least from some experts, that 5G rollout might take a long time because cost of deploying small cells are going to be high. And at the same time, there was no 5G sort of killer applications, right? Applications which will allow mobile operators to charge a premium for 5G services. Do you think that these 5G killer applications are emerging or have emerged? Or do you think that actually they're not needed? Because as Mike said, demand is growing so fast that mobile operators have to move on to 5G, even though they might not be able to charge a premium for that. What do you think?
I'm not sure who should answer that, but to be honest, the 5G's applications and the small cells versus macro 5G and macro cell sort of discussion and was very active a few years ago. But I think now when we look at the operators, the real deployment strategy, we see that they still they focus on developing a 5G macro network first, although they are trying to take advantage of the 5G standalone architecture to offer the private network so that they can address the 5G business-to-business market. And that is something that I mentioned earlier on, which is considered as the blue ocean blue ocean business area. It has lots of opportunities for them. So in terms of applications, and we also see lots of industry report talking about manufacturing areas, 5G factory, and transportation areas and healthcare areas, which can take a lot of the 5G applications and to help the sector grow. And so, yeah, so I think 3G to 5G, 4G to 3G is about capacity increase, but 5G to 4G, it offers low latency and these a massive number of connections, which has become an enabler of many, many new applications that 4G cannot afford and cannot build. So that is a sort of view the industry more or less take right now.
Thank you very much. And do you think that these machine-to-machine connections will generate enough revenues to actually incentivize mobile operators or private networks to go and roll out 5G networks ubiquitously?
Absolutely. I mean, and yes, in Huawei, we do say 5G changed the society, changed the world. It's not exaggerating because it has become one of the enabler together with digital technologies and transformations to help the traditional industry to sort of transform itself. Like mining, we have looked at, and the 5G, which allows the autonomous vehicle. We are looking at the whole vertical industry gradually transforming itself into a new age. So in that sense, I think, yes, it will go beyond the private, a sort of private network infrastructure business for the telcos if they have ambition to take one more step further.
Thank you very much.
You want to chime in there?
If I can just add that I think Internet of Things will be priced differently to traditional consumer devices or consumer services, so that the revenue the operators make may not be just from connectivity. It might be from selling devices, of course, but it might also be from things like systems integration or managing databases. If you are going to have many sensors out there, connected sensors, you might need to offer some system resilience to a particular customer or a particular application. So if you start to think about systems integration and solution pricing, you might get a better idea of the market. But based on connectivity alone, I think the IoT profits or even revenues are not likely to be significant. So it's therefore down to the role and the ambition that Wenbing has just referred to. If the operators have the ambition, there's a lot they can do.
Does that answer your question, Yulia?
Yes, it does. Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks very much. I'm sorry, last but very much not least, Jane.
Hi, thanks. I'll be quite brief. I mean, this year I was actually judging one of the GSM awards, the Tech for Good Sustainability one. So I have some connection in understanding what's going on at the Congress. But I teach ICTs in everyday use to master's students at the London School of Economics, and I supervise students' dissertations. And I wondered what the panel thought would be the top original illustrations that I can expect my students to be using in their essays that I mark next June, or even before then.
What a great question. Who'd like to kick off?
You're asking us to do the homework in advance. Is that the idea?
No, I'm just, sometimes I although I think I know a lot, having been in mobile since 80 something, I realize when I read my students' work that maybe, if they're from all parts of the globe, there are some things that I kind of think, oh, I hadn't seen that one coming.
Sort of horizon gazing from your students.
Exactly, yeah.
Or
Okay,
what's
so
hot?
while you're thinking, I can see you're thinking, and so maybe I can chip in some of my own work, and that fits in the sort of tech for good area. So we in China, I think we are. Of course, we're using 5G to provide the rural coverage, and that's everybody understand. But what we are trying to do is go one step further on top of that, which is to offer the rural schools the remote teaching and learning capability. And we have made a pilot project in a rural village, which is deep in the mountains, and they good job is that in China, they have laid fiber until the edge of the region, and hence they can provide 5G coverage of the village. And the school there and the children, they sort of paired with the schools in the city, urban city like Shanghai, and use the AR, VR teaching and the smart whiteboard teaching, so that the more experienced school teachers from the urban city schools can teach the rural schools students. And we even made a little video for that. It sounds quite simple idea, but when you see what the children can experience and what they're teaching is actually quite touching stories. So that's something that probably not as novel as you expect, but it's actually very real.
Thank you.
Shall I try an answer now? I had time to think about it. So I think digital health is a very interesting area. And when I think back to World Congress this year, the GSMA said that the digital divide is really about 3.8 billion, but that is really made up of coverage gaps, about 0.5 million, and then usage gaps around 0.5 billion, and 3.3 billion is based on usage gaps. So if you put the two together, you've got 3.8 billion. But that says there's an awful lot to be done to actually bring down the cost to make sure everybody can be a user and have the right device, for example. Smartphones are still too expensive for many people in the world. So my view of inclusion has to address the digital divide. And when I apply it to your students, I think digital health is a clear benefit for everybody in society. We need to make sure that digital health, whether it's wearables or connectivity to patient records or measurement devices, we need to make sure it's available to all. Now, I know we haven't got the COVID virus vaccine available to all yet, so it might take some time, but I think digital health has a lot of prospects there.
Yeah. Just one more thing that I have been participating in is to help the refugee students in Africa and in the this wave of refugees that are coming to Europe, and to be able to learn with the digital technologies. So not any advice for Huawei, but we did give some tablets for the kids there through some charities. So, and they just with only one tablet, probably not the most expensive ones, and they can do so much. And those refugee students, if you're not familiar with that, they stay in the refugee camp for most of their teenager time. They on average is like over 10 years, and they stay in there. So their education is something that's so important for them to literally change their life. So it's that's something I came across, and I just think it's just fascinating, very moving as well.
Thank you.
Lara, would you like to chime in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jane, I'm the least qualified on this panel to answer your question, but I would say, so, just before joining the GSMA, I had taken 4 years out of a corporate career, and I led a very large global charity that worked in about 100 countries. And I would say people on the move is a big issue in the globe, and encouraging female entrepreneurship, female literacy, and female protection around the world needs to be addressed by probably many sectors, but I see really good work coming out of foundations, particularly in this space. So when I think about the use of technology for good, there are lots of ways and means that I have seen it used in the field to address humanitarian issues and also emergent issues. But those two sit really close to my heart because I've visited camps around the world where I've seen, for example, us use mobile technology and mobile money to address people on the move who are running and fleeing from political conflicts. So this isn't rural poverty that we're talking about. I've seen it address issues of, the safety of women and girls, just navigating, living, moving, and breathing in their everyday kind of communities. And I would hope my personal bent is that I would hope we'd see more of that. When I joined the GSMA, I loved this kind of collision of the two worlds between its foundation and its work representing mobile operators around the world. So I think, I think Mike said it earlier, the sector's kind of bravery and leadership around leading out and being committed to the SDGs is huge. I hope we see more conversation around closing that digital divide and use of technology to solve the world's biggest challenges.
Thank you.
Really helpful, Laura. And I think Kim had something to add in. She's put something in the chat, but Kim, do you want to join us and respond to Jane?
Yeah, hi, sorry guys. I originally had a question, and that's why my hand is up. I originally had a question of same thing around the 5G use cases, but perhaps just to respond, Jane, I don't know if you're aware of the mobile for development team at the GSMA, all our resources, but yeah, so we cover mostly in LMICs, but what mobile operators and other tech players are doing to cover this this important area, which is leveraging mobile and tech for good. Some of the areas include sort of disabilities inclusion, which is the program I'm primarily working on at the moment. But yeah, so how can mobile operators sort of bridge the digital divide, which obviously we know has become more of an issue given the digitization that's been sped up with COVID. But for people with disabilities, obviously they're even more marginalized and have been largely left behind during this period. And so a lot of our content areas touch on gender inclusion as well, mobile money, agri-tech, humanitarian response as well, how mobile operators and other tech players are leveraging innovation for more digitized inclusion. So there's plenty of work being done there. And yeah, I'm sure your students will stumble upon it if they're doing their research, but hopefully they'll find it.
Correct them when I can. Thank you very much.
Super. Yeah.
I think I'd like to thank the panel very much and thank you all for your attention, your excellent questions throughout, because I think that's added to the conversation and will continue to do so. So we, I'll look forward to when we can all be together. And it's just been a fantastic opportunity to hear from the GSMA in a really positive way and hear from Huawei and some of the challenges and some of the differences that are going on in China, and from Mike, especially the perspective, both long and current. So thank you very much.